A researcher in Kyoto points at a container. The dog looks at her, looks at the container, and runs toward it. There's food inside. Good dog. She repeats the experiment, points at another container. The dog runs again. Empty. Third round. She points one more time. There's food in the container. The dog knows it. She knows it. And the dog refuses to move, just sits there staring at her. 34 dogs went through this experiment. 34 dogs made the exact same decision. Not most of them. Every single one. We're going to come back to this moment later, because what was happening inside those dogs' minds was not instinct, and it definitely wasn't magic. If you search online whether dogs can sense bad people, you'll find thousands of articles saying the same thing. Dogs can read energy. Dogs have a sixth sense. Dogs somehow just know. But honestly, that explanation misses the most fascinating part, because your dog is not psychic. Your dog is doing something far more sophisticated. You've probably experienced this yourself. Someone walks into your home and your dog suddenly changes. Not aggressive, not barking, just quieter, more watchful. Maybe they sit a little closer to you than usual, and even if you can't explain why, something inside you starts paying attention too. That feeling seems mysterious until you realize your dog has spent its entire life studying human behavior. In the first few seconds after meeting someone, your dog is already running a social evaluation system so fast it looks supernatural. The first thing they read is movement. Dogs notice bodies before faces, the way someone enters a room, the tension in their shoulders, whether their movements are smooth or unpredictable, whether they approach directly or naturally, curve around the dog. Humans barely notice these details consciously, but dogs evolved to survive by reading motion patterns. At the same time, your dog's nose is collecting information your brain cannot even detect. Stress changes human body chemistry. Fear changes sweat composition. Aggression subtly changes breathing patterns and scent. Your dog is reading all of that in real time, like invisible weather moving through the room. But the most important signal is you. Your dog watches how you react to another person, the hesitation in your voice, the slight tension in your posture, the tiny pause before smiling. Dogs have spent thousands of years learning human emotional patterns because their survival depended on understanding us. None of these signals alone prove someone is dangerous, but together, body language, scent, emotional tension, social observation, they create something incredibly powerful. From the outside, it looks like your dog magically knows who to trust. They don't magically know. They're evaluating. And back in 2015, a researcher named Akiko Takaoka at Kyoto University decided to test just how quickly dogs judge human reliability. The experiment was deceptively simple. 2 containers sat on the floor. One held food. The researcher pointed toward it, and the dog followed the gesture immediately. Reward. Trust established. Then came the second round. The same researcher pointed again, but this time the container was empty. The dog ran over expecting food and found nothing. No reward. No explanation. Just a broken expectation. Then came the third round, the moment that stunned researchers. The human pointed at a container that actually did contain food again, but the dogs refused to follow. Not because they stopped wanting food, not because they suddenly became confused, but because something far more important had changed. The dogs no longer trusted the person giving the signal. What makes this study extraordinary is not that dogs noticed a mistake. It's that they attached that mistake to one specific individual. When researchers replaced the original person with a completely new human, the dogs followed the pointing gesture immediately again. Trust restored instantly, just not with the liar. Think about what that means for a second. Your dog is not blindly obedient. Your dog is constantly updating a mental profile of the humans around them. Reliable, unreliable, predictable, unpredictable, safe, unsafe. And according to researchers, dogs make these judgments incredibly fast because unpredictability creates stress for them. Dogs crave consistency. In the wild, survival depends on accurately predicting behavior. An unpredictable animal is dangerous. An unpredictable human can be dangerous too. But this is where the story becomes even more fascinating, because dogs are not only evaluating how people treat them, they are also evaluating how people treat you. Later that same year, another team at Kyoto University ran a different experiment. A dog watched its owner struggle to open a container and ask a nearby stranger for help. In one version, the stranger helped the owner. In another, the stranger deliberately refused and turned away. A neutral person sat nearby doing nothing. After the interaction, both strangers offered the dog a treat at the same time. The dogs accepted food from the neutral person without hesitation, but many of them refused to take food from the person who had refused to help their owner. Let that sink in. The dog was never harmed. Nobody threatened the dog. Nobody touched the dog's food. The dog simply watched someone treat their human poorly and made a social decision. Researchers called this third-party social evaluation, something previously associated mostly with primates. But what matters even more is the emotional implication behind it. Your dog may be paying attention to the people who disrespect you long before you fully notice it yourself. And strangely, dogs seemed more sensitive to negative behavior than positive behavior. Helpful people earned little extra trust. Unhelpful people lost it immediately, which honestly makes evolutionary sense. Misjudging one dangerous person matters more for survival than overlooking one kind person. Your dog is not looking for heroes. Your dog is looking for threats. And that changes the entire way you should think about your dog's behavior around people. Because maybe your dog is not reacting to some invisible supernatural energy. Maybe your dog is reacting to patterns your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. Humans are surprisingly good at ignoring discomfort. We explain things away. We rationalize strange behavior. We smile through tension because social harmony matters to us. Dogs don't do that. Dogs observe first and decide later. And that brings us to one of the most unsettling studies ever conducted on canine social intelligence. Researchers at the University of Vienna wanted to know whether dogs could distinguish between someone who was simply wrong and someone who was intentionally deceptive. The setup sounded almost absurdly simple. A treat was hidden inside one of two buckets. Then a second person secretly moved the treat into the other bucket. In one version of the experiment, the first person watched the switch happen. In another version, the first person left the room and genuinely had no idea the treat had been moved. Then both humans pointed toward the original bucket, the empty one. From the dog's perspective, the gesture looked identical in both situations. A human pointed at the wrong bucket. But the dogs responded differently depending on what the human actually knew. When the person had seen the switch happen and still pointed incorrectly, the dogs were far more likely to ignore them and search for the food themselves. But when the person truly did not know the treat had been moved, the dogs followed the gesture more often. Think about the implication there. The dogs were not just evaluating actions. They appeared to be evaluating intent. Not this person was wrong. This person knew they were wrong. That is a completely different level of social processing. And strangely enough, breed differences revealed something else fascinating. Retrievers and border collies, breeds historically selected for cooperative work with humans, were significantly better at detecting intentional deception. Terriers behaved differently. They often ignored the social information entirely and checked things themselves, which honestly makes perfect sense when you remember what terriers were bred for. Independent problem-solving, hunting alone underground, making fast decisions without waiting for instructions. In other words, even your dog's personality may be carrying thousands of years of evolutionary history inside it. But here's where all of this becomes personal. Most dogs start from trust. That's important. Your dog loving strangers does not mean your dog lacks instincts. It means trust is their default setting until evidence changes it. And when a highly social dog suddenly becomes hesitant around one specific person, That hesitation matters because it often comes after your dog has noticed a pattern repeated enough times to trigger caution. The terrifying part is that humans often notice the same feeling much later. You hear this story constantly after relationships collapse. Someone says, "My dog never liked him," or "My dog acted strange around her from the first day." And maybe what people remember as instinct was actually observation happening below conscious awareness. Your dog saw the tension in your body before you admitted you were uncomfortable. Your dog noticed inconsistency before you recognized manipulation. Your dog remembered what your conscious mind kept trying to excuse away. But I need to be honest with you here because this is where the science becomes more complicated. In 2025, researchers at Kyoto University published another study that seemed to challenge everything we've talked about so far. Dogs watched humans behave generously or selfishly toward another dog. Then, the dogs were allowed to approach whichever person they preferred. The result surprised everyone. The dogs showed almost no preference at all. They didn't consistently avoid the selfish person, and they didn't strongly prefer the generous one either. For a moment, it looked like the entire idea of dogs socially judging humans might fall apart. But the deeper researchers looked, the more interesting the explanation became. The studies showing strong social evaluation almost always involved situations emotionally connected to the dog itself or to the dog's owner. Someone lied directly to the dog. Someone refused to help the dog's human. Those situations mattered personally. But watching a stranger interact badly with another unfamiliar dog may simply not carry enough emotional significance for the animal to care. And honestly, that distinction says something powerful about dogs. Your dog is probably not walking around constantly judging every person in the world like a furry detective. Your dog is paying closest attention to the social world connected to you. Your home, your emotions, your safety, your relationships. That's the real story hidden underneath all these experiments. Dogs did not survive beside humans for thousands of years because they were stronger than wolves or smarter than primates. They survived because they became extraordinary observers of human behavior. Somewhere across 10,000 years of sleeping beside our fires, watching our faces, tracking our movements, and depending on our moods for survival, dogs evolved into emotional specialists. They learned to recognize tension before conflict, fear before danger, unpredictability before betrayal. And maybe that explains why certain moments with dogs feel so strangely human, the way they stare at you after an argument, the way they position themselves between you and someone making you uncomfortable, the way they quietly leave the room when tension rises even before voices get louder. They are not reading your thoughts. They are reading patterns. Constantly. Endlessly. Sometimes more honestly than we read ourselves, which brings us back to that laboratory in Kyoto. A researcher points toward a container. The dog looks at her, looks at the container, and stays perfectly still. At first glance, that moment looks small. But it isn't, because that dog is doing something profoundly intelligent. It is remembering. It is comparing past experience against present behavior. It is deciding whether trust still exists. And maybe that's why this topic resonates so deeply with people, because somewhere inside us, we want to believe loyalty can also see clearly, that the creature sleeping beside us notices the things we miss. Maybe not through magic, maybe not through some mystical sixth sense, but through thousands of tiny observations accumulating silently over time. So now I want to ask you something. Has your dog ever instantly disliked someone who later proved untrustworthy? Or maybe the opposite? Did your dog trust someone you were unsure about, and eventually you realized your dog was right? I genuinely want to hear your story, because after reading all this research, I'm starting to think dogs may understand human behavior in ways we still don't fully grasp. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe and come back for the next one, because the science of what animals secretly understand about us gets even stranger from here.